Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, April 15th, 2024. All right, so obviously the big news from the weekend, Iran launched an attack on Israel in retaliation for Israel bombing its consulate in Damascus, Syria, and killing a very high-level Iranian general in the Quds Force and killing 6 other members of the IRGC. So I was off Saturday, but we had Will Porter. He did a great job covering it for us as it was happening. But basically what Iran did is they fired 300 missiles and drones, over 300 missiles and drones. So it was a pretty big attack. They announced it as they launched them, and then it wasn't until a few hours later, because they launched them from Iran, that it reached Israel. It seemed like they were firing the drones first to distract the Israeli air defense systems, so then some of the missiles could break through. And the U.S. and the U.K. and Jordan actually helped intercept the missiles as well. So the U.S. directly intervened in defending Israel. It's interesting that Jordan did too, because they have a big population of Palestinian refugees who, haven't been happy about Jordan's military relationship with the U.S. lately and Israel. So that might stir some discontent. But it looked like most of the missiles and drones were intercepted by either air defenses or the other countries I just mentioned. But some did break through and damaged an Air Force base in southern Israel. Only one person was injured. It was a 7-year-old girl, a Bedouin girl in the Negev desert. Of course, it's the someone who has absolutely nothing to do with any of this that ends up getting hurt. But only one injury, and nobody was killed. So it's basically been left off at a point where Israel might not have to respond, but they're saying that they will. And you have the U.S., President Biden. So this first story is about President Biden telling Netanyahu that the U.S. will not support an attack on Iran. So this was reported all over the place on Sunday. I think Axios first had it. But it said that in a phone call like late Saturday night, President Biden told Netanyahu that the U.S. would not join Israel in any offensive action against Iran after this attack. And they're basically saying, oh, this is a victory. This is how they're trying to spin it here, is that U.S. officials are touting Israel's defense of Iran's attack as a victory. And that's the message that Biden apparently conveyed to Netanyahu. And this is a sign that the U.S., at least for now, doesn't want the situation to escalate. I have a quote in here from a senior Biden administration official who said, quote, Israel really came out far ahead in this exchange. It took out the IRGC leadership in the Levant. Iran tried to respond, and Israel clearly demonstrated its military superiority, defeating this attack, particularly in coordination with its partners, end quote. So in a statement on the attack released by the White House, Biden said that he would convene with other G7 leaders to coordinate a united diplomatic response to Iran. So it's saying that it'll be diplomatic, specifically using the term diplomatic there. And Israeli officials are claiming that 99% of the Iranian missiles and drones were intercepted by Israeli defense systems and with assistance from the U.S., Britain, and Jordan. Some missiles, as I mentioned, got through and damaged the Nevatim air base in southern Israel, and that's what Iran said its target was. They said there was F-35s based there, and Israel used F-35s in its bombing of the embassy. So Iran gave Israel plenty of time to respond to the attack by announcing that it fired the drones hours before they reached Israeli territory. At the same time, of course, that would have been picked up on radar and everything. But Iran also said that they told other regional countries that they gave them a 72-hour notice. They said they gave friendly countries a 72-hour notice. Iranian officials said the attack was limited and made clear that they do not seek an escalation with Israel. But Tehran is also warning that it will launch an even bigger attack if Israel responds. Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi said in a statement on Sunday, quote, "If the Zionist regime or its supporters demonstrate reckless behavior, they will receive a decisive and much stronger response," end quote. So while the U.S. is signaling that it seeks de-escalation and will not support a potential Israeli attack on Iran, it is unclear what Israel will do next. The Israeli War Cabinet convened to discuss the situation on Sunday, and Israeli media reports said that they agreed a response would come, but they didn't decide on where or when. And there's a quote from Benny Gantz, an Israeli War Cabinet minister. He vowed that Israel would respond, but signaled that it would not be imminent. Gantz said that the event is not over and that Israel should, quote, "build a regional coalition and exact a price from Iran in a way and at a time that suits us," end quote. So while we have Biden saying that the U.S. wouldn't support offensive action against Iran, they're still saying that they will defend Israel. So that means basically if Israel decides to do something on its own, and it doesn't, to me, I haven't seen any indication that Biden is telling them, don't escalate this thing. We're not going to bail you out. So if Israel does end up attacking Iran in another way, whether they hit Iranian territory, if they do something like bomb an embassy again, you never know what they might do. The U.S. is saying that it will defend Israel, essentially. And as I mentioned before, the background on this, an important thing for people to understand is that Israel has been targeting Iranians in Syria for a long time. For years, it's conducted covert attacks inside Iran, assassinations, killing nuclear scientists, planting explosives in nuclear facilities. And Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. This is a civilian nuclear program that they've attacked, and Israel is the one that actually has nuclear weapons, a secret nuclear arsenal. And since October 7th, Israel really ramped up airstrikes in Syria and killed a lot of Iranians. I believe about 7 Iranians were already killed before the embassy bombing, and then they killed another 7. And of course, just the huge escalation was the fact that they bombed a diplomatic facility, in the middle of Damascus. So it's just a huge, huge escalation. And of course, a big reason why they probably did this, why Netanyahu probably did this, was to provoke a big Iranian attack. They want to provoke a big regional war, it seems like, to get the U.S. to directly intervene. So we'll see what Israel does next. Just not sure what their next move is going to be. All right, so the next one here, Israel's defense against Iran attack cost over $1 billion. So the activation of Israeli air defenses in response to an overnight Iranian drone and missile attack likely cost over $1 billion. And this is according to Brigadier General Reem Aminoash. I definitely butchered his name there, but he's a former financial advisor to the IDF Chief of Staff. And he said that, all the different types of air defense systems that Israel has, they have the Arrow, David Sling, the Iron Dome, and they have American Patriot missile systems. And he says, you start to add all that up. He estimated that the cost was between $1 and $1.3 billion in one night. I mean, that's just a huge cost. And then the estimates for how much it cost Iran are less than 10% of that. So less than, I believe I saw around 50 or 60 million. So that's a pretty big difference. And this goes to show, if Iran decides to do this again or a bigger attack, they definitely got a good sense. They kind of probed the Israeli air defenses with this attack. I'm sure that they learned a lot from it. And then I just kind of mentioned the same background information in this story. But, I put in a quote here from the Iranian foreign minister. Again, the message here is that this was a limited attack. And he said that, and, the one thing they're making very clear is that they don't want a war with the U.S. So he said, quote, We sent a message early this morning to the White House and stated that this was a limited operation with minimum force only to secure our rights on legitimate defense and to punish the Israeli regime, end quote. And again, he mentioned that the base that they hit was one that they were hosted F-35s, and that's exactly what they were trying to target. And Israel has confirmed that this base, there's minor damage at the base. I haven't seen any indication if they destroyed any aircraft or anything. All right, so the next one here, Mike. So it cost Israel over $1 billion, and that's probably a lot of Iron Dome munitions, which, of course, who pays for that? So the next story here, Speaker Johnson says that the House will vote on more Israel aid this week. So Israel doesn't have to worry. The Americans are going to come pay the bill. House Speaker Mike Johnson said on Sunday that he will bring a bill to provide Israel with more military aid to the floor for a vote this week in response to Iran's attack. So Johnson said in an interview with Fox News, quote, House Republicans and the Republican Party understand the necessity of standing with Israel. We're going to try again this week, and the details of that package are being put together. Right now, we are looking at the options and all these supplemental issues, end quote. So it's unclear if he plans to lump the Israeli aid in with spending for Ukraine. The House has yet to vote on that $95 billion foreign military aid bill that includes $60 billion for Ukraine, $14 billion for Israel, and a few billion for Taiwan and other spending in the Asia-Pacific region. Johnson previously pushed forward two standalone bills for Israel, standalone Israel aid bills. And this was done, to support the slaughter in Gaza. So these didn't become law. So the first one that he pushed forward was a $14 billion bill for Israel that cut money from the IRS to fund it. So that passed the House, but because of the IRS cuts, the Democrat-led Senate never took it up for a vote. And then there was another bill. They upped the aid to Israel to $17.6 billion, and he brought it to the floor of the House for a vote, but they had to suspend some rules, so it needed a 2/3 majority, and it didn't pass. So that effort failed, and the reason why that didn't pass, the reason why enough Democrats voted against it for it to fail, is not because they oppose arming Israel, of course, although there is, the handful of progressives that do, and that is growing. That number is growing, but they voted against it because it didn't have the Ukraine aid. The Democrats want the whole package. But now you got to think, with this attack, with all the war fever that's going on in D.C., if he puts forward a standalone Israel aid bill, I would imagine that it would pass. But we'll see what happens this week. It sounds like he's going to be negotiating with some people. But his priority is to get more money to Israel. And, if that's what you do, if Congress immediately passes a big aid package for Israel, what message does that send? That sends the message of, we could do whatever we want. We could bomb Iran's embassy, and the U.S. is always going to have our back here. And that aid would be on top of the $3.8 billion that Israel gets from the U.S. each year. All right, the next one here, Iran seizes an Israel-linked ship in the Persian Gulf. So this was also on Saturday, but this was before Iran started firing the missiles and drones. And this article is from Will Porter. It says, Iranian commandos have seized a cargo vessel with reported ties to an Israeli billionaire, taking control of the ship as it sailed near the Strait of Hormuz. The incident took place amid soaring tensions between Tehran and Tel Aviv. He just mentions the background there. So this vessel is a Portuguese-flagged container vessel, MSC Aris. It was boarded by troops with the elite IRGC on Saturday. So they said, this ship is linked to Ayel Ofer, who's an Israeli-born billionaire. He's involved with Zodiac Marine, which was the owner of the ship. So likely related to part of Iran's response as well. All right, so the next one here, no improvement in aid access in northern Gaza. So a UN official overseeing relief efforts in Gaza said that aid access has not been improved in the northern part of the Strip and pushed back on Israel's claims that the UN was to blame for the difficulty in distributing aid. So this is Jamie McGoldrick. He is a UN humanitarian coordinator, and he said the responsibility for the occupying power when it comes to providing humanitarian assistance for starving Palestinians. He's saying it only ends when the aid reaches the civilians in Gaza. Basically, Israel has been saying, oh, we're letting the trucks in. It's not our fault that the aid's not getting delivered, even though Israel's been killing aid workers. They were targeting the police in Gaza who were the security for the aid shipments. They killed the head, the police official who was overseeing that. And so McGoldrick said that distribution inside Gaza was difficult due to the security vacuum and due to delays with Israeli checkpoints, Israeli inspections. They say they have to always wait a very long time. And then I mentioned, of course, that aid workers have also been targeted by Israel. At least 177 employees of the UN's Palestinian Relief Agency, that is UNRWA, have been killed since October 7th. And of course, the killing of the 7 World Central Kitchen workers, that got the world's attention because 6 of them were from Western countries. And there's actually another incident last week that I missed. Nobody was killed or hurt, but UNICEF workers said that they were in a vehicle traveling in Gaza and that it was hit by Israeli gunfire while they were waiting at one of these checkpoints. They said the gunfire came from the direction of the checkpoint and hit the vehicle, but thankfully nobody was hurt. So McGoldrick made these comments on Friday that the aid deliveries haven't gotten better in northern Gaza. And remember, northern Gaza is where, according to Samantha Power, the head of U.S. aid, so a very high-level U.S. official said that she believes in areas of North Gaza, famine is already happening. But that's not, I mean, the U.S. is still giving Israel everything it wants and supporting this war and starvation blockade, and even though they're saying that famine is happening. So they're knowingly helping starve people to death. So anyway, the same day McGoldrick made these comments, Israel said that it started letting aid in a new border crossing into northern Gaza. And this is something that they said they would do after the World Central Kitchen workers were killed and Biden spoke with Netanyahu. And if you remember last week, I had a few stories that said this border crossing still isn't open. Originally, they were going to do the Erez border crossing in northern Gaza, but they said they made a new area. They didn't specify where it was, and they did not say how many aid trucks have entered. And I haven't seen really anything else about that since this story on Friday of Israel just saying that they opened it. And I actually remember about a week and a half ago, there was a story in the Jerusalem Post that said aid was going through the Erez border crossing, which turned out not to be true. So I'm pretty, skeptical of this until we see like confirmation by the UN or the Palestinians. So anyway, the aid doesn't seem to be getting much better, and of course they need a ceasefire and like a full humanitarian relief effort with just the way the situation is on the ground. All right, so the next one here. So this is just a video story at the Gray Zone about Armenian Christians under siege in Israel, and this is in East Jerusalem, in Jerusalem's Old City. This is from Jeremy Lofredo, and he's been doing these great reports over there. And he speaks with an Armenian Christian who's involved in, there's this Israeli private company that is trying to push them out, that is claiming, some property that they own. And of course, this company, it's called Zana Capital, is backed by the Israeli police and the IDF who show up you have Israeli settlers show up and terrorize these Armenian Christians. It's a very old community in the old city of Jerusalem, and they're being threatened to be pushed out. And he was showing, it's a really interesting video. You could see the guy he interviews is like staked out in this location that they have like tents set up so they just can be there if these guys show up, if these settlers or whoever with this private company. Sometimes they show up with bulldozers and destroy things. So it's definitely worth checking out to see what the Armenian Christian community is going through there. All right, so the next one here, Russia's military is bigger than before the invasion. So this is a real indictment of the American proxy war against Russia. So a top U.S. general told Congress last week that Russia's military is 15% bigger today than it was before the February 2022 invasion of Ukraine. And this means that the goal of weakening Russia has totally failed. So this is Christopher Cavoli. He's the head of U.S. European Command. So he said the army is larger by 15% than when it invaded. He said that Russia increased its frontline troop strength from 360,000 to 470,000 over the past year, mostly due to Russia raising the maximum age of conscription from 27 to 30. Listen to this quote. He said, quote, "In sum, Russia is on track to command the largest military on the continent. Regardless of the outcome of the war in Ukraine, Russia will be larger, more lethal, and angrier than the West when it invaded," end quote. So, again, this is something Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin declared back in April 2022, that one of the goals of this thing was to weaken Russia. And more recently, we've seen hawks in Congress when they're trying to justify continuing fueling this thing, when they're trying to get more money for it. The claim is that, we're getting our money's worth. Russia's military is taking a beating and no Americans are dying. It's just the Ukrainians who are dying. But here we have a very high level U.S. general saying, no, Russia's military is bigger and stronger than it was before. And they've also really increased their industrial capacity, and they're way outproducing the U.S. and NATO when it comes to artillery shells, tanks, and things like that. So this all goes to show that time is very much on Russia's side. And the next story here also shows that. Ukrainian general says that the battlefield situation has significantly worsened. So this is Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief General Oleksandr Syrsky. He said on Saturday that the situation on the front line in eastern Ukraine has significantly worsened in recent days as Russian forces are making steady gains. So Syrsky, who replaced Valery Zaluzhny in February, said that since Russian President Vladimir Putin was reelected last month, there's been a significant intensification of Russia's offensive. The Ukrainian commander also said that the warmer weather has made it easier for the Russian tanks and other armored vehicles to advance. And this, it seems like Russia is focusing its offensive on eastern Ukraine. It's mostly the fighting is heavy in the east rather than, in the south in Zaporozhye and that. But Ukrainian and Western officials have said that they expect Russia, that this late spring or early summer, they're expecting Russia to launch a major offensive along the entire front. And then Ukraine could really be in trouble. And another report I went over recently was that Ukrainian military officers were saying that wherever Russia decides to focus its offensive, Ukraine's lines could totally collapse. So that could potentially happen in the east there. All right, so the next one here, Ukraine tightens rules on military service, angering soldiers. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Ukraine's legislature advanced multiple new laws that tighten rules on conscription and extend military services for those already in uniform. The rules have angered Ukrainian soldiers. So this was last Thursday. The Ukrainian Rada passed a bill that tightened the requirements to register with conscription offices and increase punishment for those who fail to do so. Additionally, Ukrainian lawmakers removed a provision in the bill that would have granted relief to soldiers who have been in combat for 36 months. Wow. So 36 months. I mean, that's 3 years. So because this is one reason we've seen protests. We've seen like the wives of soldiers, the families of soldiers who have been deployed, who have been fighting since 2022, since the beginning of this thing, who volunteered in the beginning and are still deployed at the front lines and still fighting over 2 years later. So apparently they could have gotten relief after 3 years, but this is getting rid of that. I mean, that just goes to show how desperate Ukraine is for soldiers if they're not going to give them any relief. And they're trying to do this mobilization, and they're lowering the conscription age and all that. But this is another big problem for Ukraine. And it seems to be, you see Ukrainian officials say that this is a bigger problem than the situation with the weapons. Some have even said they can give us all the weapons we want, but we don't have the men to use them. So just all these reasons to say, all right, you know what? For the U.S. to say, let's start talking to the Russians. Let's pressure Zelensky to negotiate. He can go retire at his villa in Miami or wherever it is. But no, they just want to keep going ahead with this. And, as this thing goes on, if the lines do collapse and it's a complete disaster, then Ukraine's going to have even less leverage than it does now. All right, so the next one here, Israel destroys Hezbollah building in eastern Lebanon. This one's from Jason Ditz. So Israeli warplanes carried out an attack in the Baalbek district of eastern Lebanon on Sunday, destroying a 2-story building that reportedly belonged to Hezbollah, and Hezbollah confirmed the incident. So this is pretty deep inside eastern Lebanon. And Lebanese security sources said that the attacks inflicted at least 3 casualties. Hezbollah reported a single Hezbollah fighter was killed, but did not say exactly where that was or how, and they denied any casualties in the building attack. So these were separate attacks that they're talking about. So this is still happening. The exchange of fire, the Israeli airstrikes pretty deep inside Lebanon. All right, so the last story here, the House votes to extend warrantless spying power. So this article is from Will Porter, and it says U.S. lawmakers have passed a bill reauthorizing the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, a law which allows the government to surveil American citizens without a warrant. A small group of Republicans previously blocked the vote, but allowed it to proceed following a minor amendment to the law. The 2-year extension passed the House on Friday in a bipartisan vote of 273 to 147, with 126 Republicans and 147 Democrats supporting the bill. So now it goes to the Senate. There was an amendment that somebody tried to include that would have forced federal agencies to obtain warrants before spying on Americans, which seems completely reasonable, but that amendment failed. So it went through. Speaker Johnson supported it. And I went over the story recently that the vote was initially blocked. So there was some hope there, but then they pushed this thing through. So the way that this works is that they say it's designed to target foreigners. It gives the U.S. government the ability to collect surveillance and information on foreigners. But there's a huge loophole that lets them do it to Americans as well. Any American that's speaking to a foreigner could be targeted. And there's countless examples of this being abused. So there's not a good thing to keep on the books. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Kelly Vlahos. Bipartisan lawmakers rush to battle stations after Iran attack. And that's something I didn't really get into, I should have maybe included some of that. All the hawks, the Iran hawks in Congress saying, we got to attack, calling for an attack on Iran in response that the U.S. and Israel bomb Iran. Of course, that's going to be whipped up this week. There's going to be lots of talk like that. One from Aaron Mate, seeking Mideast quiet, Biden fuels regional carnage. One from Mark D. Joff, do fiscal hawkery and supplemental military packages mix? One from Ted Snyder, is France ready to fight Russia? And one from James W. Carden, Netanyahu is trying to drag the U.S. into war with Iran. So that's everything for me. I hope everyone had a good weekend. You could always support this show by sharing it. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. If you follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram. It's looking really great over there. But I will be back with some more news. Thanks for listening.